Hi, I'm Bob the Hollow. Today's theory goes deeper into Fina's lore and explores some unexpected ramifications. If you're new to the channel, I'd recommend watching the Primordial Flame, Non-Warrior Nox, and the Good, the Bad, and the Rotten videos, so you can be up to date with the relevant theories. But if you want to skip those, the summary is Fina was originally Gwyn's wife, and later became Rosaria, Queen of Lothric, and also that Guinevere relocated to Drangleic, where she became the Great Dead One, and ultimately the Rotten. So, without further ado, when it comes to Fina, or Rosaria, one of her most distinctive features is her twisted soul. Not figuratively, mind you. Her soul is literally twisted into what I can only describe as unnatural ways. Alongside its red coating, these characteristics make it hers, the most unique soul ever presented by the series. Something happened to her, and it is our duty to figure out what that may have been. The trail to unveiling this mystery had been previously laid out when I first associated Fina with the Rite of Kindling. Though, admittedly, details were sparse back then, but I believe we can fix that now. Now that we know whatever became of Guinevere, a through line should become clear. A bloodline from Nero, the first of the dead, to Guinevere, the Great Dead One. Fina was Nero's daughter, and Guinevere was, in turn, the granddaughter of the Great Lord of Death. This fact was already hinted at visually in Dark Souls 2, since Nito is presented as a walking mass of amalgamated skeletons, and the Rotten was, likewise, a mass of undead hollows. This conclusion was also hinted at in Dark Souls 1 through the placement of one of Fina's statues in the catacombs, the one in front of which we acquired the Dark Seance ring that granted an audience with Gwyndolin. These statues have long been theorized to have been of Gwyn's wife, given the baby and the sword depicted in it, and the association they create with the Nameless King, who was considered a god of war, which was compounded by the proximity of one such statue to a sunlight altar. And, interestingly enough, these statues can be retroactively attributed to one of each four children of Gwyn. Gwyndolin's and the Nameless King's have already been mentioned. The one in the Undead Parish I assume to represent Guinevere, since her illusion presided over the cathedral in Anor Londo, and whose covenant, the Princess Guard, can be associated with the female warrior statues surrounding the parish. And lastly, there's a statue sitting behind Framed Spot in Firelink Shrine, which I believe to be of Fina as well. Despite the differences, it's still a maiden-like figure holding a baby in the vicinity of the others, and it fits perfectly as a figurative representation of Filianor. It's somewhat hidden, just as Filianor was. The moss in the area can be associated with the overgrowth of the Ringed City. The pond represents the Abyssal Swamp, and even Framed's hole can be associated with the hollowed-out structure sitting beneath her cathedral, and since the primordial serpents move through the abyss, then that hole leads into the dark, just as Filianor leads to the Dark Soul. Besides these hints, it must also be said there's always been a vacant spot in the lore, waiting to be filled by this theory. One that originated in the empty coffin laid next to Nero's. It's always been assumed it belonged to someone. We had just never figured out to whom exactly it may have belonged to. I've seen a theory speculating it may have been Guinevere's, but it required way too many assumptions, if I recall correctly. As it will hopefully become clear, that coffin could only ever have belonged to Fina, Queen of Anor Londo. The Rite of Kindling is the key to linking Fina and Nito, but not much is known about it. We know it was Nito's power, that it allowed Pinwheel to rule over the catacombs, that it was passed down among clerics, and that it was sought after by the Undead Rebellion. But all of that just leaves us with more questions rather than answers. The rite was used to further kindle bonfires, but that makes absolutely no kind of sense, considering Nito would have no use for it. So, what exactly made it Nito's power to begin with? Well, bonfires are all linked to the first flame, something that should be readily apparent from the fact we always link the first flame at a bonfire. So, bonfires in general are a medium to a bigger power source, the first flame. We kindle bonfires by offering humanities to it, and, according to my theories, the first flame was created from the dark, meaning we'd be using its primal matter in order to strengthen that selfsame link. The Rite of Kindling allows us to transfer more humanities to a bonfire, so the bonfire can draw more energy from the first flame. The primary function of the rite is to affect energy transfer. This also explains why bonfires tended by firekeepers are stronger by default, since firekeepers are, functionally, just storage units for humanities. Okay, so how can we link that function with Nito? Nito is the Lord of Death, but he does not hold power over the concept of death itself. Death didn't stop existing after Nito was gone, and the first of the dead wasn't even dead, really, since we killed him. Nito became the Lord of Death from having devised the means to employ the power of necromancy. And that's where energy transfer comes into play, for a necromancer must transfer part of its own soul into the bodies being reanimated. These can be surmised both through traditional item descriptions, as Nito's soul states he offered much of it to death, and also by looking at the reanimated bodies themselves. The reanimated skeletons in the catacombs have a smidgen of soul in their eye sockets, and for as long as the associated necromancer lives, that soul will remain there and the skeleton will continue coming back to life. But once the necromancer has been dealt with, the skeleton's soul will disappear upon death and they'll just remain dead. This effect, of which a variant can also be seen in Dark Souls 3, has the bonus advantage of explaining how necromancers control the bodies they raise, since a part of their soul has become a part of those reanimated bodies. And by now you may have realized the relevancy of the Rite of Kindling. We, the undead, only know of its usage where it pertains to bonfires, but for a necromancer, its conductivity affecting properties work directly with the means used by them to reanimate dead bodies, making them better necromancers in return, which would explain both why Nito would have devised the rite and how it would have allowed Pinwheel to rule over the catacombs. Now, with all this laid out, it becomes easier to tie the Rite of Kindling to Fina's lore. First, there's the color coding. The power pool Nito taps into produces red energy. This can be observed through the Gravelord Dance miracle that creates ethereal red blades from the ground. This property is transferred to the Rite of Kindling, which is called Nito's power, and then carried further to Fina's soul after it's being manipulated by it. Second, there's the Rite's application, where the property of soul transference has been imprinted on her soul, allowing it to be moved into a Firekeeper, Anastasia, and then back again. And lastly, there's the bit of lore where the Rite is described as having been passed down among clerics. And by clerics, of course, we could mean none other than the Way of White. I've spoken at length about the Way of White in Non-Warrior Nox, and also in a couple of podcasts with Sinclair and Sophie. I'll leave links to those two in the description. I had already mentioned the origin of their name is most likely derived from the white flame found inside the Divine Embers, the same one that empowers their weapons. What I hadn't mentioned is Filianor's involvement in their creation. Following the same color-coding logic from before, Filianor produces white energy, just like her sibling from a distant future, Prince Lothric, establishing yet another bloodline, featuring Fina/Rosaria as a mother to both. And here, one should consider the context in which her powers are shown to us, when her slumbering, ghostly visage whisks the player away to the distant future. That flash of bright, white light that emanates from her illusion is a literal way of white. Not only that, but, as you may recall, the original purpose of the Way of White was to contain the spread of the undead curse by means of its undead hunts. And that just happens to also be the purpose Filianor serves in the Ringed City, a literal Way of White, keeping the literal Dark Soul at bay, in an effort to contain the rising dark. Now, there doesn't seem to be any evidence she'd have been directly involved in the creation of that institution, so, with all things considered, I believe it more likely that her quote-unquote sacrifice and the powers she left behind were used as a beacon around which Lloyd's cleric knights could rally and set forth in their mission to enforce the will of the gods. Either way, Filianor's involvement places Fina in a position to take advantage of the institution which, in turn, explains its presence in the Tomb of Giants, which can be observed through the corpse of a divine blacksmith, and the fact the Rite of Kindling was passed down among its ranks. But just like Nito, the Way of White should have little use for the Rite without further exploration, since that item only benefits necromancers and the undead. The two groups presented as enemies by the Divine Ember's description. Luckily, this question is easily answered by the fact the Undead Rebellion sprang from within the Way of White, giving that sect a reason to seek out the Rite. This is yet another fact observable in-game, through Leroy's transformation from a white phantom into a dark spirit. Fina may have been Nito's daughter, but her allegiance lies with herself and her offspring. If raiding the Tomb of Giants is what it takes to further her goals, then, apparently, she'd have no qualms in doing so. And that, I believe, is at long last the complete lore of the Rite of Kindling. One last thing for my broken mind to obsess over, so... yay? Before moving on, I'd like to make a couple more side notes. First, another link between Rosaria and Guinevere comes from flesh manipulation. This is presented through Rosaria's power of rebirth and Guinevere's numbness hex that is said to transform the caster's flesh. And also that the link to necromancy, which is clear between Nito and Guinevere, is also present in regards to Fina. Necromancy isn't a natural occurrence. Wherever it can be found, an explanation for it must be found as well. And Fina's heritage serves to explain the reanimating skeletons in the Ringed City's Mausoleum lookout. One may be inclined to explain them away as creations of the Judicator, but no other Judicator ever wields necromancy. But here we can find a rare instance of the hidden blessing associated with Rosaria, Queen of Lothric. Its placement follows the pattern I've presented before, where the Judicator drops the divine blessing, representing her public image, and the hidden blessing lurks beneath it, showing her true colors. If necromancy is at play here, then something must be present that would allow it. And I think the answer to that may reside in the coffin sitting behind the blessing. Remember, Fina is the only god to leave a dead body behind, as seen whenever we or Leonhard try to kill her, and notwithstanding Filianor at World's End. And I believe this is where her body was buried, between the fall of Lothric and the time in which we get to visit the Ringed City. All her children were gone. The illusion of Filianor was all that remained. There really was nowhere else her body could have been laid to rest. The Undead Rebellion once sought the Rite of Kindling, as described by the effigy shield, and I believe they actually succeeded in their endeavor. We may acquire one instance of it from Pinwheel, but that's not really a rite, is it? A rite, or a ritual, is a set of instructions. Nito's power was the knowledge of how to perform the ritual that produced the item he plundered from Pinwheel. Dark Wraiths were servants of the rebellion, and their Dark Hand is nothing more than a weaponized Rite of Kindling. The Dark Hand is red, in accordance with the color coding framework we've established. It allows the transference of more humanities, just like the Rite did, and its icon even looks like it's holding the same kind of item we got in the catacombs. And that's not all Nito's power would have granted them, as the red eye orbs they used also share a common ancestry with the Dark Hand. All eye orbs function by enabling individuals to reach different worlds, not completely unlike the Eyes of Death used by Nito's Gravelord servants. But eye orbs seem like artificial constructs, judging by the crystallized appearance of their interior, which is visible in cracked eye orbs. Eyes of Death, on the other hand, can be farmed from basilisks. Now, since the latter is natural, whereas the former is artificial, then it stands to reason that the eye orbs were derived from the Eyes of Death. And Fina is the best candidate to have been their creator, since she's the only character to have a kind of eye orb all of her own, the black kind. considering she's also the only character to have used the right of kindling to manipulate their own soul. It is also likely she created the Dark Hand and the Red Eye Orbs for the Undead Rebellion as well. Whenever one endeavors to brave Fina's lore, it is inevitable that one should venture into Velka's as well. It may not seem like it at first glance, but their paths have always been intertwined. Both conspired with the Undead Rebellion, but their allegiance against the gods had started with the first man. Velka left the Purging Monument in the Ringed City, considering that it offers absolution and dissolution just like her statue does, while the Hidden Blessing shows Fina's influence over the Judicators. Filianor was left behind, but not forgotten. Eons later, Velka's followers, the remnants of the Undead Rebellion, oversaw the Way of White in Carim, the same place where Fina's trusted servant, Lautrec, waited for the moment to retrieve his mistress's soul, and when the time came, he was aided by Oswald. But why, though? What is it that binds them? Well, I've come to believe Fina and Velka were sisters. Further still, I believe they were sisters of chaos. Speculations regarding Velka's relationship to Izalith have abounded ever since the series first came out, spurred by the shared title as witches. Small hints surfaced here and there, such as talismans fashioned from the hair of both Velka and a Chaos Witch, or New Londo, where Velka's influence was undeniable, having been built directly on top of Kelag's domain. But things started taking on a different shape once I made a deeper connection between Chaos and Dark, as explained in the first scene video. The Izalith staff description in Dark Souls 3 had already brought Chaos and Dark one step closer, and my theory places Dark as an essential component of Chaos itself. But we'd still need a framework that could accommodate a relationship between Velka and Izalith, while, at the same time, establishing connections to the rest of the lore. Soulsborne lore is an interwoven tapestry. No piece of lore can exist in isolation from the whole. So, now, in order to build this framework, we should start by explaining why she left Izalith. The first breadcrumb is the one who's often been dubbed the Lost Chaos Sister. This unidentified character was theorized due to the number of in-game Chaos Sisters coming one sister short from the ones in the game's intro cutscene. It's also always been theorized she'd be associated with the body laid to rest in front of Sisla's discharge, which were Kelana's robes, leading many to believe the lost sister had fled Izalith and left that body to fake her own death. And I have also seen people taking this theory further by connecting her jurisdiction over Sin to the creation of the Chaos Flame, which is sometimes described as a sin as well. In this context, she'd have rebelled against her mother's transgression, fled, and lived in a sort of penitence ever since, becoming the goddess of sin so others wouldn't commit the same mistake. But there are two problems with this interpretation. First, the way Velka presides over sin never manifests itself in any way that would allude to such connection. Killing NPCs brands you a sinner in the Book of the Guilty, but casting Chaos Pyromancies does not, for instance. And second, judging by that corpse, it makes no sense for the lost sister to have faked her own death. Just like all other gods, the Chaos Sisters' bodies disappear when they die. If she wanted to fake her death, leaving a dead body is the last thing she would do. But since she did, in fact, leave a dead body behind, then she must have done it for a different reason. Considering how the sisters seem to have cherished their brother, and that Sisyphus eternally watches over that body, I think she left the body for his sake instead, to fool him into believing she was still there with him. But then, there'd no longer be any reason to believe she fled Izalith. Yet another hint regarding the lack of animosity between Velka and Izalith is the aforementioned proximity between the entrance to the Demon Ruins and New Londo. They're not just built on top of each other, they're actually linked. We may take the long way around to get there, but from New Londo to Izalith, it's just a hop and escape, if you have the key to the gate leading from New Londo to the Valley of Drakes. The true reason for her departure has been revealed by her painting in Ariandel Chapel, and by her participation in the crossbreed experiments. In the painting, Velka is holding the picture of a knight. Now, considering the connection between her followers and the Way of White, illustrated by Oswald of Carim in the Undead Rebellion, I began suspecting that picture may have been of Lloyd, since its warrior-like appearance fits with how he's described by the game. The question then became, what was the nature of their relationship? The most obvious alternatives would have been either daughter or wife, and I ultimately settled for wife, since it helps bridge other aspects of the lore. First, this connection would help explain why Velka was chosen to participate in the crossbreed experiments. Goddess of Sin or not, those experiments were both secretive and sensitive. It would make a lot more sense for her to have taken part in them if she was related to Gwyn's royal family. And now, with the theories presented in this video, Fina and Velka's marriage would constitute both houses, Nito's and Izalith's, presenting the hand of one daughter each to the house of Gwyn. They may not have been ruled by Gwyn, strictly speaking, but they certainly enjoyed a vassal state-like relationship with Anor Londo, and this practice is par for the course with these kinds of deals. With the added bonus of being a better fit for the not fake her own death interpretation of the Lost Sister's fake body. Moving on, we should mention more seemingly random instances of necromancy. Just as before, wherever it can be found, an explanation for it must exist as well. We all remember the skeletons in the painted world of Aria Myth, and there are reanimating skeletons in the undead settlement as well. The latter, in particular, always seemed very random to me. But if Nito was father to all Sisters of Chaos, then necromancy in places associated with Velka is no longer random, it is only logical. Velka created the canvas of the painted world, and it's reasonable that such powers would be infused into it. And in the settlement, the skeletons are either a manifestation of her magic and her statue, around which they rise, or it's also possible that necromancers became forlorn after Nito's death and flocked to Velka's teachings and the places associated with her. Another connection can also be made through eye orbs. We have already explained the black and red eye orbs, but what about the blue ones? Where do they come from? They were originally utilized by the Blade of the Darkmoon Covenant in Dark Souls 1. The Covenant was headed by Gwyndolin at the time of our playthrough, but it was created by Velka. Its goal was to punish sinners as defined by Velka's Book of the Guilty. Also, that Covenant's reward, the Darkmoon Blade spell, is a dark miracle, despite the fact Gwyndolin was a soul sorcerer. Automatically attributing sin is part of the Covenant's official purpose, as it serves the interests of the gods. Absolving sins, however, fits Velka's involvement with the Undead Rebellion, as it allowed members of the rebellion to sin without fear of reprisal. A similar application could be seen in action, even after the rebellion had failed, through Oswald's involvement with Petrus and Lautrec. After Gwyndolin assumed power over the Covenant, she branded Velka's followers, the Crow Demons, as sinners. That edict was later lifted, though, as the Corvians in Dark Souls 3 no longer drop souvenirs of reprisal. The Silver Knights in Dark Souls 3 drop proofs of a Concord kept because they have broken their covenant to Gwyndolin, now serving Aldrich instead. It was believed a covenant of Velka had been cut from the game, based on the also cut content Ring of Condemnation. In truth, her covenant has always been present, and the evidence has always bore that. Nito's knowledge allowed Fina to create the red and black eye orbs, and it allowed Velka to create the blue orbs as well. And finally, after associating Fina and Velka, and then Velka to Izalith and Nito, we need to connect Fina to Izalith herself. And for that, we turn first to the Witch's Locks. Just like the White Hair Talisman, this item is specifically stated to have been fashioned from the hair of a Chaos Witch. But two details stand out about the whip. First, there's its length. Those are some very, very long hair strands, and we'd need to find a Chaos Witch with the hair to match that. I know it wouldn't have made any sense to think about Fina when pondering about the Witch's Locks before, but now, with the benefit of hindsight, Rosaria's overflowing hair seems too obvious to be ignored. And then there's its location, as it can be found inside the Grand Archives. Its placement makes a whole lot more sense now, since, being a Chaos Sister, the Queen of Lothric was in a perfect position to supply the scholars with everything they needed to summon the demons who besieged the castle. And there's even the white, good-looking thing all over her hair. I was never sure what that might be, but considering the locks and Gertrude and the Mangrove, that's probably just candle wax from her last stop before heading out to the Cathedral of the Deep. Fina being a daughter of Izalith also helps to explain the Batwing demons in Anor Londo and Lothric Castle. A lot of speculation has been made regarding why they had joined the ranks of Gwyn, but no conclusion has ever been reached. But now it just makes sense. Fina and Velka were sisters of Chaos, and the Batwing demons accompanied them to Anor Londo. And even now, so many years later, Fina's presence in Lothric explains why they'd answer to the messengers carrying the small Lothric banner. So, I was going to close this section with a little note about undead rapport, which I still have no idea how to pronounce correctly, but I had a bunch of epiphanies while editing, so here's what I've got. As I have stated before, Fina had come to Anor Londo prior to marrying Osiris and relocating to Lothric. Being a Chaos Witch, it stands to reason she'd have innate pyromancy, which is confirmed by the Witch's Locks. Currently in Anor Londo, we can find the Fire Witches. They should have been easily associated with the Chaos Witches, but we were thrown off that scent by the fact they carry staves imbued with the power of the Profaned Flame, which stands as a more intuitive source for both their title and their fire powers. But these witches were originally ordained as holy knights. Now, Hodrick is also a holy knight from the Sunless Realm, that is, Irithyll, and his armor and shield both state these holy knights were associated with flames, despite Anor Londo's disconnect from the flame motif in favor of the moon, due to Gwyndolin openly ruling the kingdom. Further still, it is said the shield's design symbolizes those who both harbor and oppose the power of flame, which is an apt description for Fina, who is a Chaos Witch that advocates for the fading of the first flame. The most reasonable conclusion, then, is that the Blades of the Dark Moon served Gwyndolin, the Nameless Moon, while the Holy Knights served Fina, who, being a Chaos Witch, had also ordained Fire Witches among their ranks. Holy Knight Hodrick is a member of the Moundmaker's Covenant. When it comes to this covenant, there is some confusion regarding their relationship to the gods. The Vertebra Shackle's description makes it sound like the Moundmakers oppose the gods, since the term Shackle of the Gods would have a negative connotation. But the Covenant's highest reward, the Pyromancy Warmth, says they feared separation from the gods and sought a familial bond. This second description clearly places the Moundmakers and the gods as friends rather than foes. The problem here is mistranslation. In Japanese, the words shackle and bond, from the vertebra and the spell respectively, are actually one and the same, kase. This word has a base meaning of binding, and can be translated as either a shackle or a familial bond. But there was no reason to have used both meanings in two different items related to the same covenant. The vertebra's description is too vague in this regard, and the meaning could have gone both ways. But Warmth's description, on the other hand, provides a context that only works with the meaning of bond, so they should have just used that translation for both, making the vertebrae they hunt a symbol of union with the gods, not a symbol of oppression by them. Now, why is all this relevant? Well, This is relevant because Fina created both Warmth and the Covenant as well. Regarding the Covenant itself, it bears remembering Fina already leads Rosaria's fingers, which is another invading Covenant. They're located next to the Cathedral of the Deep, where Rosaria currently resides. There's also the fact Hodrick is an Irithyll Holy Knight from the order that served Fina in Anor Londo. The Nana mentioned by the Cage Spider who first hints about the Covenant is probably the Shrine Handmaid who served Rosaria as the High Priestess who would have looked after Ocelot. And lastly, there's Warmth, the peculiar pyromancy of the Mound Makers. Despite being a pyromancy, Warmth is a healing spell. The Princess of Sunlight is generally regarded as the mother of all healing miracles, but if they had originally come from Fina, that nugget of information would have been stripped from the annals of history along with her name, leaving her daughter as the official architect for this kind of spell. But we can transpose bountiful sunlight from Rosaria's soul. I had previously provided an explanation that would allow for this transposition, even if Rosaria hadn't created the spell. But there's actually no reason to assume she didn't. Just like Gwyn imparted his knowledge of lightning miracles to the Nameless King, Fina would have imparted the knowledge of healing miracles to Guinevere as well. Healing miracles can be further associated to Fina through a not often discussed mechanic from Dark Souls 1, Resonance. If you want more details of how this mechanic works, there will be a link in the description to a Illusory Wall video on the matter that gives a complete rundown on it. But the short of it is that by casting specific spells, you can spawn white rings of light, in the words of other players, that increase the efficacy of a certain group of miracles. So, the miracles that generate the rings are Bountiful Sunlight, Great Heal, Soothing Sunlight, and Wrath of the Gods. The miracles that can benefit from the rings are these four, plus Heal and Great Heal Excerpt, which are variations of Great Heal, Force and Emit Force, which are variations of Wrath of the Gods, and Replenishment, which is a variation of Soothing and Bountiful Sunlight. Okay, so Resonance is relevant for two reasons. The first reason is the word bridging mechanic. Resonance isn't something inherent to all miracles, just these ones. This specific group of miracles share a common trait that allows them to affect different worlds, and this trait can be traced back to Fina, since it harkens back to her mastery of the Eye Orbs. This common trait also means the four original miracles have a common origin, given how unique it is, giving us the second reason, which is demonstrated through color coding again. There's nothing to associate Wrath of the Gods to Guinevere, but we can tie it to Fina if we consider she's also the origin for the white energy producing powers that connect Filianor, Rosaria, and Prince Lothric. And the dual color coding of those four miracles, that are orange and white, is paralleled by the resonance rings. Most of the rings are white, but there's one that is not. There's an orange version of these rings that is used to summon the Batwing demons of Anor Londo, taking us full circle back to Fina's origins as a Chaos Witch. A few more notes here are that Fina, being a Chaos Witch, makes Guinevere's marriage to Flame God Flann a lot more logical. That Gwyn's grab attack is, well, that's Sacred Flame isn't it? It certainly looks like it. And it never made much sense for the Lord of Sunlight to use fire instead of lightning with that technique. But if that's just a pyromancy that Fina provided for him, then things start coming together more nicely. The question then becomes of whether or not that spell was already used with the same purposes as its modern counterpart. Because if it did, then that might mean the Black Knights that accompanied Gwyn were used as sacrifices to the First Flame, not just as bodyguards. And there's also a very small, very speculative note regarding clothing. Gwyn, the Nameless King, the Silver Knights, none of them wear white, but all three royal daughters, Gwyndolin, Guinevere, and Filianor, wear white robes embroidered with gold, or a gold-hemmed white set, one might say, which seems to me like a style stemming from the gold-hemmed black set that the Chaos Sisters wore. The same one to which Fina and Gwyndolin had gone back to, just in time for when Prince Lothric came around. Okay, last point in this tangent, I swear. We need to talk about the Way of White again. As I said, since they used the power of the white flame found inside the Divine Amber to empower their weapons, that's the most likely candidate for the origin of their name, along with Filianor's sacrifice to keep the Dark Soul at bay. And I think Fina created that white flame. With everything I've said thus far, that just becomes kind of obvious, doesn't it? I mean, she created these powers fueled by white energy, and she's a Chaos Witch. Of course she created the white flame. This is also hinted at by the Sage's Call in Dark Souls 3. According to my theories, Rosaria would have planted the Crystal Sage within the ranks of the Pharaon Legion to corrupt them from the inside. The Sage's Call, found in Pharaon Keep, not only has a white flame inside of it, just like the Divine Ambers of the Way of White, it also allows for the infusion of Crystal, Blast, and Deep Gems. Crystal, of course, is for the Twin Sages. Blast and Deep Gems are both a reference to Fina herself, regarding her divine lineage, her dark corruption, and her current location in the Cathedral of the Deep. Fina, being the creator of the original Divine Ambers, also explains why occult upgrades in Dark Souls 1 required divine weapons as a base material. So, yeah, I think Fina was more than likely directly involved in the creation of the Way of White, which explains a lot, really. Alright, back to the regularly scheduled rapport thing I was talking about. Okay, just one more thing. I was editing this part, then I realized something else. So, regular phantoms are white. That kinda scans with what we've been talking about, since the soapstones that are used to create these phantoms need to have come from somewhere, and Fina's a prime contender to have been their creators. There are white and red soapstones, and Fina's the source for both the white flame and that white energy magic stuff, and the red eye orbs. She's kinda like hold a master's degree in eye orbs somehow, and those are word bridging tools like the soapstones. Now, the white ring can make anyone appear as a white phantom. This ring first appeared in Dark Souls 2 with the description, a precious ring which grants the protection of Kella, god of dreams. So, was her original name Kella? I think it was. I mean, We've all wondered if that was a reference to Isolith's family somehow, right? And Kella is also mentioned in the Spirit Tree Shields, which, noticeably, have the ability to deflect spells. And this trait can be said to be derived from Wrath of the Gods, which I have just argued was created by her. There's also Force, but Force itself is derived from Wrath of the Gods, so yeah. And most shields that have this ability are said to have been blessed or enchanted, so the magic that possesses this ability is a precursor to the shields that were given this ability afterwards. And all of these shields, most of them, are associated with either the clergy, the Way of White, or the Blue Sentinels, which makes sense in this context, doesn't it? So, yeah, just wanted to say I think Kella was Fina's name at birth. She could have had a first and second names, but that doesn't really seem like something they do in this world, so she probably changed it after she got married to Gwyn. You know, like she would change it again later on when she married Osiris. I don't know, maybe that's just something they do here, right? They don't have last names, so they get married, they change their first name. I don't know. Okay, that's it. Rapport, go. And the final link is the Undead Rapport Pyromancy. Another little bit of lore that never made much sense to me. This spell is so unlike any other of its kind. Its existence just always bugged me to no end. But I think this might be the only spell devised by Fina we ever get to see in-game. Its English description, Pyromancy of Kelana, makes it sound like it was created by her, but that's just a mistranslation. The original description is identical to all other special pyromancies sold by her. Its charming effects are reminiscent of Fina's attributes, since she is described as possessing faithful beauty. And even its unique color can be traced back to the red color coding argument from before. Regarding the Undead Rapport, none of these points constitute hard evidence for this conclusion, but it does fit the framework I've established and it does provide an explanation for it, so just take it with a grain of salt, will ya? After all is said and done, I'm personally very satisfied with these conclusions. I had started linking these two goddesses all the way back in Non-Warrior Nox, but I still needed to paint a more complete picture for them. I still needed to find a reason for them to have stuck together as they did, all the way through the crossbreed experiments and the Undead Rebellion after that. Something I'm particularly fond of regarding their lore is how they always managed to look out for their children. Velka sacrificed herself to create the Painted World that should have been a safe haven for her daughter. And even Fina, it may not seem like it, but she seems to always have been around for her offspring. I mean, it didn't turn out fine for any of them, but she was always there, fighting for a future that could accommodate them. From her first generation, Guinevere died in Dark Souls 2, but the Nameless King settled just around the corner, and the placement of the Mangrubs shows she kept an eye out for Gwendolyn. She even made a full circle back to Filianor in the end. And from the second generation, she made sure Prince Lothric would be taught not to throw himself into the first flame. Lorien stuck around to protect him, and Gertrude was in the company of those she thought were her allies, with another man grub to keep an eye on her. Too bad she was double-crossed by pretty much everyone. The scholars did not do right by Gertrude, and Aldrich decided he would feast on Gwyndolin. I'm not sure where Sullivan's allegiance lies in the final stages after he had lost his grip over an Orlando. He's said to have helped Aldrich, but he also seems to have killed MacDonald. Maybe his allegiance was only to himself. Maybe his hands were tied and he was doing the best he could out of it. I'm just not sure. And in the aftermath of this exploration, with all the conniving and rebelling that went around, one might be inclined to see these goddesses under that tired old light of the deceitful and manipulative feminine stereotype. But just like Aristophanes once did, I invite you to consider looking at their story from a different perspective. Whenever a female historical figure is told to have lied, manipulated, and betrayed, remember that they all lived in a man's world. Men did all those things too, but they had the benefit of being remembered for the great battles they fought and the great empires they built instead. Just like Gwyn did. When you're denied the grip of the sword, you're forced to fight by any other means you can get your grip on. In a world ruled by kings who would sacrifice their children, they chose to fight through deceit and rebellion. But they chose to fight nonetheless. Let's start the side notes with a couple of thank yous. First, thank you, John, for noticing the rite of kindling isn't an actual rite, that the item itself is probably a byproduct of the actual rite. That was very insightful. I'm very proud of you, my friend. And second, thank you very much, Mute, for just randomly tossing an idea out there. I had been working on Fina's connection to Nito ever since I came up with my theories about Guinevere, the Great Dead One, and the Rotten. But I was originally looking at it from the lens of Guinevere being Nito and Fina's love child. Then, one day, Mute just said, and I quote, "There's strong links between Nito and the Lordran royal family. I've seen a theory that says Gwyn's wife might have been a daughter of Nito." I couldn't find that theory online, but the idea fit my own like a glove, and it opened up a world of new possibilities. So, yeah, thank you very much, Mute. Oh, and if anybody knows where to find that theory, let me know, will ya? Now, something I'd like to mention is the possibility that Velka was a firekeeper herself. I get that idea from the hand bandages that are visible on her paintings in Ariandel Chapel. And considering the fair lady was also turned into a firekeeper, I don't think that'd be much of a stretch. But as of now, I still don't have any solid evidence or a logical framework that would explain it, so we'll see. Regarding Rosaria, a question that's been on my mind for a while is, why did she stay put in the Cathedral of the Deep? Like, the Crystal Sage in Crucifixion Woods is protecting the way to the cathedral, but there's another path there, behind the bonfire, that's being blocked by the breeze. And we get to Irithyll by traversing the catacombs of Carthus, but once we get there, if we look behind us from the bridge, the path to Anor Londo has also been closed by rubble, possibly as a result of the churning lands effect, as Emma puts it. So, I think if she wanted to follow Aldrich to Anor Londo, she just wouldn't be able to. There are no roads left that could take her there. Something else I've been thinking about concerns her servant Leonhard, more specifically about his burn scars. We've all speculated about the origin of those scars, but there's no sensible enough answer to that question, or at least, not that I know of. Well, in light of what I proposed regarding the witch's locks, there's another possibility to be considered now. Maybe he was sniffing her hair, got burnt in the process, and now refuses to heal those scars on account of how much he cherishes that memory. He obviously has some very unhealthy and unresolved feelings for her, and this is a Japanese game, after all. I really wouldn't put it past Miyazaki to put that in the game. And the last side note is about the Nameless song. I'm pretty sure most people don't think about that song as being a part of the lore, but the Milfanitos sang that song. That song exists within the game world. That song's existence is canon. So, I'm just gonna say it. I think that song is called the Nameless Song because it was a lullaby Fina used to sing for her children. Then it became nameless after she was stripped from the annals of history, just like the Nameless King. Her daughter, Guinevere, taught the song to the Milfanitos, and now, in Dark Souls 3, I swear to God, I think she's singing that song for the main grub Lautrec, snuggling comfortably in her bosom. Alright, that's the end of that. I think the Fina/Nito portion of this theory is pretty solid, and I think the links to Izalith are a bit more individually circumstantial, but when considered as a whole, I think the framework they create is pretty damn solid as well. What do you think? Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you, as always, to all my supporters at Patreon. John, Ethan Finlay, Sinclair Lore, Balam, Several Bets, Tyler Baldwin, and Chris, etc. Yeah, thank you very much for believing in me. If you want to help support the channel, check out my Patreon page. There's only one tier and everyone is free to help with whatever they want. And they all get access to the same benefits, namely early access to the videos and even earlier access to the scripts. Or you can check out my Ko-Fi page for one-time donations. Every little bit of help will be greatly appreciated. Okay, until next time, stay safe and see you around.